I want to welcome Nicholas Mancuso to the Nurses on Fire podcast. Nicholas is an insurance specialist at Policygenius. And well, actually, I don't even know if that's your real role. So I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself and explain what you do for Policygenius. And we are going to be discussing all things disability insurance. So I am super honored to have you here, Nicholas, and congratulations on getting engaged yesterday on Christmas.
Thank you so much. Yep, it was a great time getting engaged. Really happy to be engaged now. But my name is Nicholas. Nicholas Mancuso. I am the Senior Operations Manager for Disability and Advanced Planning at Policygenius. And I've been working in insurance for about 6 to 7 years already. I was a financial advisor before I came here, and I brought my skills to Policygenius and to help develop the marketplace that we have.
That's awesome. So just really personally, how do you find working on this side in the insurance world versus doing financial planning?
Sure. I think, well, it's still considered financial planning, and we're still helping people to do what we want, but we're a little bit more specialized in insurance aspect. Personally, I love disability insurance. When I was 27 years old, I actually fell and broke my hip singing karaoke. So I was disabled for about 4.5 months. Went through it myself. Insurance kind of holds a soft spot in my heart, and I think that when we're doing a financial plan, it's important to have this as the backbone to ensure success. And that's why I'm here, and that's why I like insurance. Is you can actually help people and do the right thing for them and get their financial plans to stay on track.
Yes. And I have to ask, what were you singing in order to break your hip?
Sure. So if the story, it was I Want It That Way by the Backstreet Boys. I was doing what's called the 8 basic boy band dance moves, which are point, grab, pull in, throw away, pump with the hand, would you like some chips, swim, and yes. And then I slipped and fell and broke my hip.
You are good. Those moves are really good. So I'm hoping everybody is watching on the YouTube channel because Nicholas has moves, okay? Okay, so let's talk about disability insurance. So obviously this podcast is for nurses on the path to financial independence. And I want you to explain why disability insurance is a critical part of financial independence, FIRE planning.
Sure. So specifically with FIRE planning and talking to that aspect, the thing that we want to do when we're FIRE planning is put as much away as possible so we can achieve this goal early, right? We're not staggering things till we get to retirement. The goal is to retire early. So in order to do that, we have to stay on target and on trajectory to what we're going to accomplish. If something comes up to derail that target, we may not end up where we want to be. So in these matters, when we are FIRE planning, what we're doing is we're banking on accomplishing our goals. If something comes to derail that, we need to prevent that from messing with our trajectory. So with insurances, specifically life insurance for the rest of our family, but disability insurance is the more kind of like selfish insurance. This is directly going to impact me. I need to ensure that my income is going to continue no matter what, so I can get to the peak of the mountain that I intend to climb.
Yes, I love that. I like the selfish insurance, but it's really not, because if you ain't bringing in no money, ain't nobody eating, okay? I'm just saying, over here, it's going to drastically affect a lot of people.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, your family's going to depend on you, and everyone who depends on you as well, but you have to depend on you if you're still alive and you can't work.
Yes. So I love that. So I like the way that you differentiated between life insurance, which is after you're gone. If something were to happen to you, your family is taken care of, but this is in the present. And yes, we all are going to die, but the chances that we're going to use life insurance are, disability insurance, is pretty common. Can you talk about like how often people usually have to take out these policies, and like the age ranges of people, because you think about disability, you think about, oh, I'm probably not going to use that. Maybe it's for older people.
Sure. Actually, disability insurance is, the older you get, the less you need it, because the window to get towards retirement starts to get smaller and smaller. Disability insurance is extremely important the longer you have to go, because it actually increases the amount that you can be paid. The age range policy is pretty much, if you're in your working years, usually between 22 to 65 is where the age range of payment can be. It can extend to 67 or 70, depending on the policy you purchase, but usually you can't purchase it past the age of 61. What you want to do is really kind of get it when you're young, when the price is very low and it can lock in. And that if something happens to derail you, you aren't completely off of where you need to be, considering that the average length of a disability claim is 34 months, but they can extend way longer. And the shocking number is actually 1 in 4 people are disabled during their working years.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. And like, you had to use it in your 20s. So you never know. So super critical.
I unfortunately did not have it when I was disabled. And I had used all of my liquid savings and hit a catastrophic health care plan almost immediately, because I was 27 years old and didn't have very good health care. So
Right.
that deductible was really high, and it was a struggle. And I was lucky that I didn't have anybody else depending on me at the time as well.
Can you walk us through, if you did have a policy in place, what would that look like? Like, how would you initiate that policy? What is the elimination period, and so on and so forth, for people to understand like the actual application of a disability policy?
Sure. So I guess based on how long I was out of work for and disabled for, I would have triggered 2 different policies. The first would have been a short-term disability policy, which most people have their employer. It would have kicked in typically around either after 7 days or 14 days, sometimes 8 days, really depending on the type of policy your employer has. But once I was out of work for that long, I would have gone to the doctor. The doctor would have justified that I was unable to do the duties of my job, and therefore I was disabled, and the payments would have started. Once those policies, group policies, can either last 90 days to 180 days. Sometimes they call them in weeks, so 26 weeks. But once we cross that threshold, a long-term disability policy would then kick in. This is somewhere around 90 days of elimination, meaning how long you have to be out of work, or 180 days. Doesn't necessarily have to be consecutive. It does have to be within what's called an accumulation period. So if I tried to go back to work for 2 days and all of a sudden it didn't work, it doesn't restart the clock. But it would have kicked over to the long-term disability, and that would have paid tax-free benefits to me, typically 60% of my gross income, in order to supplement my insurance until I fully recovered and went back to work. In the event I didn't fully recover and I went back to work part-time and I was limited due to the disability, a partial payout could have happened. So there's a lot of different ways that these policies can be activated. But the goal is to replace your take-home income. That is the ultimate goal, so that we use 100% of our cash flow for something, that I'm not making kind of trade-offs of where I'm going to apply my money. I'm going to be able to continue fully on my trajectory.
Okay. So at that age, I'm assuming that the reason why you didn't have in disability insurance, say through your employer, is because it just wasn't something that your employer offered, hypothetically, right? But can you talk to us about like employers, what employers usually offer for employees versus supplemental insurance, or what you buy on the marketplace on your own?
Sure. So I didn't have insurance, by the way. I was 1099, so I was an independent contractor at the time.
Yes.
So even if my employer offered benefits, I was not eligible. But now employers offer different types of coverage, and it depends where you are. Some states require short-term disability to be offered if you have any employees, such as New York, New Jersey, I believe Vermont. California has a beautiful short-term policy through the state. And then long-term disability really kind of varies. It depends on the industry that you're working in. Healthcare, is actually very good at offering group policies for their
Mm-hmm.
employees. But when you start to get into the private sector and small businesses, maybe not as much, because those group benefits are not as robust or federally required, such as healthcare. So it can really differ. The one major thing about employer-sponsored policies is that your employers are paying for it. So the IRS, I like to say, is like a shadow, and it's always going to peek out when the sun comes up. Uh, and the thing we have to remember is the IRS, the government wants their money. So if your employer is paying this benefit on your behalf, and then you receive a benefit from it, they're going to look at that as income, and then it's
Right.
going to be taxed. So employer policies, if they're replacing 60% of your gross, uh, that's supposed to be after tax. However, because your employers are paying for it, it will now be reduced further by taxes, and it leaves a significant gap in our cash flow. Uh,
Mm.
Especially in fire planning, where we're trying to save as much as possible and we're keeping our trajectory in order to hit this timeline that we set forward for ourselves. In the event of a disability, we don't want 40% of our gross. We want the full 66, or as much as we can get, as close to take home as possible, so that our allocation is on par with where we had it before the disability. And that's where supplemental insurance comes in. What we want to do is bridge the gap in the taxable nature of your group benefits if it's completely employer paid. Some benefits offer options where you can pay into it and buy it up, maybe increase the benefit amount, or you can pay the taxes on it. Um,
Mm.
and there are some upsides and downsides to that, including portability and other things.
Okay. And portability just means taking the insurance, the coverage with you if you leave the employer.
Correct. So
Okay.
on average, somebody will change jobs around 7 times in their life. Like I said, not every employer will offer coverage, and then not every employment situation, such as 1099, which will allow you to be eligible for those. So portability is a really important feature of insurance, where you can take this with you as you kind of in your career and grow.
So a lot of my nurses that listen to this podcast are travelers or per diem or 1099 employees. And I know that the availability of coverage will depend on the specific employer at the time and if they're working within an agency. But for you, if you like for example, you were totally 1099, so you didn't have the coverage through your employer, then you would just have to buy a supplemental policy, right?
Correct. So I would have bought
Mhm.
a full individual policy.
Individual
Uh,
policy. Uh-huh.
Correct. Supplemental policies and individual policies are essentially the same thing. Uh, the only difference is the amount of benefit that you receive is either designed to supplement your group, or it's your full income replacement. The thing is, insurance companies won't allow you to purchase more than a certain percentage of your income. They don't want you to be worth more disabled than able to work.
Hmm.
Uh, they don't want
Yep.
you to purposely go and get disabled and get a raise or something. So they're going to limit you there, and that's why the supplemental policies are actually a great feature for people who have group policies. They
Mm-hmm.
are 100% portable. They're yours to take with you. The definitions are typically stronger, and it gets you to that full income replacement that you're looking for to keep your trajectory going.
Awesome. Awesome. Got that. I have a buy-up policy for my coverage, for my group coverage right now. And I also have a supplemental policy that's totally portable. And I can't say that I was particularly versed on what that all meant and if I even needed it. But now I'm very convinced that it's super important for me to have, especially because my family so heavily depends on my income, and so does my business and everything else. So how does somebody know how much insurance they need, or if they need insurance in general? Disability insurance, that is.
Sure. So the need for disability insurance is really easy to determine.
Mm-hmm.
One is, do we depend on our income to save and invest and retire eventually? Because one day it's going to stop, and usually that's when we have enough to retire, hopefully. And if we're dependent on this income to keep coming in, then we need to have some type of protection there to keep it. What I like to say and compare it to is the goose and the golden egg. if you had the choice to get one or the other, would you rather have the goose or the golden egg? The golden egg is a great thing to have, but if something were to happen, you would have to spend that egg. The
Mm-hmm.
nice thing about having the goose is that it's going to keep laying these eggs.
Thanks.
And that's what I like to think of disability insurance. If you think of your income as your goose and you're relying on that to lay eggs, we probably need to talk about getting full coverage here.
Right.
In terms of calculating enough benefit for us, if specifically we're doing a fire plan, we need to consider what the breakdown of our savings are, how much we're putting away, how much we're using for base benefits. If you rely on, let's say, just a group policy and it may be taxable, where is the trade-off going to come? Are we going to lower the savings amount and thus set our target further out? Are we going to dial back expenses, or are we going to keep things where they are? If we're keeping things where they are, we should have full income protection, meaning roughly 66% of our income in post-tax dollars. So that means
Mm-hmm.
non-taxable benefit. That's the replacement that we're trying to get entirely. So essentially, if you're making $100,000 a year, for easy math, roughly we want to take home $66,000 a month, or $66,000 a year, or $5,500 a month in tax-free benefits.
And I think it's important that you're talking about post-tax benefits versus pre-tax benefits, because like you mentioned earlier, if you're getting your policy through your employer, that is that benefit is taxable unless you buy a buy-up, and then, then it kind of replaces more of your income, but chances are it's not going to meet that 66%, correct? After taxes.
So the buy-up, if you're only working at that employer and you're not per diem
Mm.
anywhere else, or you don't have
Ooh.
1099 income anywhere else, it should replace your full income. However, if we're
Right.
working outside of our employer in these kind of independent or per diem roles, that's not included in your group benefits. So we're going to have an
Mm.
income gap there, and we should have
Right.
supplemental.
Got you. Okay, so that's where supplemental definitely is essential. Can you talk about group coverage and the minimum amount of hours somebody needs to work? I have a lot of nurses that are per diem, and they kind of just work minimum shifts. How many hours, like per pay period per month, or however it's defined, do nurses need to work in order to typically qualify for group coverage?
Sure. So there's a slight dependency on your employer for that one. Certain
Mm-hmm.
employers have different rules here, and depends on the plan. We like to see between an average of 30 to 32 hours per week. Now, it depends on where your scheduling comes in, because I know in my past, a lot of my nurse friends like to schedule themselves to have like as much time off in a row together, and then kind
Got.
of work straight like 12, 12, 12, 12, 12, 12,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so that they can kind of take vacations or live the life that they want to live. And I think that as long as it kind of works out for an average, you could
Mm.
be okay. But really, the person to ask for that, and I don't want to give any definitives, would be your HR specialist at
Yes.
the hospital, who would know more about the individual plan that you have there.
Nice. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah. So check with HR in regards to that. But as long as you're almost meeting full-time hours, basically, you qualify for group coverage. Other than that, you probably need to be looking at getting an individual disability policy if you're just working kind of minimum shifts, if you're not covering, like if you're just working somewhere just to meet the minimum requirements, you probably need to have your own supplemental insurance. Does that sound right?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
the individual supplemental insurance also has uh, hourly requirements.
Oh.
Some carriers, the minimum is 24 hours on average per
Mm-hmm.
week,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of the lowest guidelines. One of the most notable carriers for nurses happens to be Assurity, and I think they're at 30 hours per week is the minimum for them.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about how people can go about applying for disability insurance. Let's talk about Policygenius in particular, and why should we use Policygenius?
Sure. So Policygenius is an online marketplace. And what we do is we shop out to the top carriers in the industry to help you get the best deal for you. Because not everybody is in the same boat or with the same occupation or the same working features or in the same health or age. We want to really make sure that we have your full profile and that we can get you the best deal for you. So what we're going to do is, for disability insurance, we work with 10 of the top carriers in the industry, and we really want to take your profile, shop it out, and see who's the best features for you. We'll work with you to consult on the specific design that's right for your financial profile. Maybe we are fire planning and we want to set that benefit period a little bit lower than to age 65, maybe 10 years, because that's our target retirement date. We'll help you design the policies. We'll help educate you on what it is that you're actually purchasing. We want you to know what you're getting, and we want you to feel good about it. And that's, as brokers, that's where we're uniquely capable, is that we don't work for any individual carrier. We're actually commission free as agents, and that's done purposely to keep us unbiased and carrier agnostic. Yes. But what we want to do is we want to make a good recommendation for you, educate you on what you're purchasing, and help you reach your financial trajectory.
So I think that's awesome, because if you're kind of like mystified by kind of just this whole disability insurance world, like I know that I totally was until very recently. And so if it's still super confusing, I think that Policygenius is an excellent platform to be able to access so that you can get your questions answered and know that you can have unbiased support in regards to making sure that you get the coverage that you need, not the coverage that is recommended because of some kind of incentive that another agent may or may not have. I mean, we always like to think that people have our best interests at heart, but it's always a bonus to know that you are not commissioned by the products individually as agents there. And so we know there's that guarantee that you're working for our best interests. So that's awesome. And I love Policygenius as a platform in general, because Policygenius does not just offer disability insurance. They offer life insurance. And what else do you guys offer?
We offer home and auto insurance as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see? It's an excellent platform to shop most of your insurance needs, mostly the insurance needs that you need. Everybody needs. So I think it's a great company. I personally have used Policygenius, and I've found it super duper affordable. And I often use the platform because I always like to see if I'm being charged too much. So I do at least a once a year assessment of how much I'm paying for things and if I can optimize that better. And I can just do that very quickly over their platform. And what I love about the platform is you don't have 50 million salespeople calling your phone, blowing you up, sending you emails. Just the information is right there. No hassle, no haggle. And so I think it's an excellent platform. I think everybody needs disability insurance, and that's why I'm super enthusiastic to have you on to discuss this, because I couldn't have explained it so articulately as you, because like I said, like this world is new to me, but I knew it was super important for me and for my family. And I know it's super important for all my nurses and other people in my community that may need this. So what else do we need to cover? I think we pretty much cover. Oh, you know what? One more thing I did want to ask you about is Social Security. So the difference between having your long-term disability policy and what Social Security offers.
Sure. So Social Security is really based on how much you've been contributing towards it over time. So somebody who's just starting might not have as much in benefits as somebody who's been contributing to Social Security for years and years. In addition to that, one of the major differences here is definition of disability. What defines me as disabled? To start there's about 4 different definitions. There's one called any occupation, meaning that if I can perform the duties of any occupation, I'm not disabled. The second is what typical group policies are, which is called 2-year ONOC, meaning if you can't do the duties of your own occupation for the first 2 years of a disability, you are disabled. After those 2 years, you have to be unable to do, within reason, any occupation. So based off of education and age and skill. I mean, they're not going to expect you to go from being a nurse to a rocket scientist flying
Right.
to the moon, like within reason, like not saying like, you know what I mean? Like within reason, like if you can't perform the duties of your job, they're also not going to expect you to go be a plumber. Like they
Right.
want you to
Thank
be
you.
relatively close to the same occupation. The third definition is called own occupation, meaning if you can't do the duties of your occupation and you're not working anywhere else and earning another income, you are disabled, which is a base definition on most individual policies.
Mhm.
And then the strongest definition, which is what we like to put on policies, is if you cannot do the duties of your occupation, you
Mhm.
are disabled, even
Mhm.
if you work in another field. So let's say as a nurse, you can no longer be bedside. However, you can work at a school and teach and help develop a new generation of nurses. You are technically not in your occupation anymore. You can still receive
Ah.
disability claims and
Mm.
work and receive your income. Social Security is the any OC definition, meaning
Mm.
that if you can work at all, you are not disabled. Uh, Actually, most people are actually denied claims on their first attempt to receive Social Security benefits. It's very, very hard to qualify for. Um, what we want to do is not necessarily rely on Social Security to force us into the benefits early or have to force that election either. What you want is something that's going to protect you fully and also not be offset by Social Security. In the event
Mhm.
that you are fully disabled, it doesn't knock you out of eligibility for this benefit. So you can actually receive both. If Social Security pays out, it does not reduce or does not have to reduce your individual payout, and you can get that Social Security benefit on top.
But isn't there like a offset provision? Can you explain that? Like, how does that work if you're receiving both benefits?
Sure. So in certain occupations, it's forced. In certain,
Okay.
it's an optional benefit. But essentially, there is a rider that is attached to policies. Um, some call it the supplemental or social supplemental disability insurance rider, meaning that a certain portion of that benefit can be offset by Social Security payouts in the event that Social Security gives you money. So again, they don't want you worth more disabled and able to work. So if Social Security pays out, they will reduce the benefits that you receive from your individual policy. This is an, oh, I'm sorry, my lights turned off. This is an optional benefit
Mhm.
that you can put on your policy, and it will reduce the cost slightly.
Mhm.
But again, it comes at a trade-off.
Right. Okay. So, like you were talking about working as like a professor in a nursing school while you're receiving benefits. Would you working as a professor reduce the amount of benefits you received?
So for a true individual policy with
Hmm.
full on occupation, no, it won't, because the
I see.
duties are vastly different.
Right.
Um,
But it depends on
it,
how
it,
that policy is written, right? Like those are the kind of policies that you guys try to write, right?
Correct. So we try to write. So for individual policies, we do recommend own occupation. We
Mm-hmm.
want to make sure that just because you're disabled doesn't mean you can't advance your career or do
Mm-hmm.
something. Um, I know myself, I don't still well, as evidenced by me going out and breaking my hip at karaoke, but I also don't dance well. But I would want to do something with myself, and I would get bored easily. So
Right.
in the event of a disability, I want to make sure that I'm able to kind of pursue my passions and work if I want to. And it's not going to necessarily knock me out of the income that I would have otherwise been making had I been able to do these other duties. When we think of nurses who, especially our bedside, we're concerned with not only the ability to like lift patients and do these manual duties, but we're also concerned with our personal immune system and our health. Around 15 to 19% of claims are cancer. In the event you have a
Mm-hmm.
compromised immune system, you are not going to be able to work bedside.
Thank you. Yep. So, my work policy, how are group policies typically classified?
So it depends on the hospital system that you
Mm-hmm.
work in or your
Mm-hmm.
employer.
Mm-hmm.
Some group policies can be true on occupation for the duration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some policies can be 2 year ONOC and then any occupation thereafter. It really depends on the benefits that your payroll and your HR team have negotiated, or the company itself has negotiated with the carriers. Also, those policies can change from year to year depending on who they sign up for. So not exactly portable or guaranteed in terms of those benefits. It really depends on the type of group policy you have, but sometimes they can be true on occupation. Sometimes they could be 2-year own occupation and then thereafter. And even sometimes it can differ depending on what position you hold in that hospital system.
Okay, got you. So that's another reason to check with your HR specialist around this. But that is also a reason to have your own supplemental policy, right? Because those are the definitions that you're going to make sure that we have in place to make sure that we can get our coverage if we're not able to perform our duties, our own occupation duties, right?
Correct.
It's so confusing. I'm like, own occupation, any occupation. What does that mean? Okay. So if anybody is confused, don't be shamed, okay? Because this is a lot to understand.
Well, I would say if you're confused, we're happy to discuss things. Yes. We could be reached by phone, chat, anything that you want at policygenius.com. And we're happy to just help educate and explain to you what you need for your policies.
No, I actually love it because I actually was like, in just doing research for this interview, I was like confused about something and I just hit the chat function. You know, sometimes when you do chat, it's like bots or it's people that are like on script and like they don't really understand what's going on. But the person who I chatted with was like super informative and was like, even like, in answering my question, she really went into depth to make sure that I was understanding what I was asking. And so I was like super duper impressed with just the chat functionality, not to mention just the wealth of knowledge that I've received from, you know, people like Nicholas, who I am fortunate to have contact with. But yeah, Policygenius just has been an amazing platform for me. So if you have any questions, if you're ever confused, I really feel like this is an excellent resource for you to have, even if you still haven't decided on purchasing any policies, just to know that you have all these people with such a great wealth of knowledge, but also are unbiased in the policies that they're offering. I feel like is super duper beneficial for anybody, especially my nurses out there. Before we wrap up, can you talk about a couple of the myths and misconceptions that you hear about disability insurance?
Sure. So one of the big myths about disability insurance is that people think that if they have a ton of savings, they don't need it. What I always like to say is a ton of savings can be a very relative thing. We want to make sure that we're ensuring those savings to be allocated to what we intend them for. So if we are using those savings to, such as retire early, we don't necessarily want to spend them to live now if we should be using our income to continue those savings. So this idea of self-insurance is non-existent until we are out of the accumulation phase of our lives. And it's one of those things where people say, I don't need this right now. I have this to hold me over. Another thing is that people have this assumption of like, this is a waste because what if I don't need it? And to that, I like to say, insurance is like a seatbelt. We don't get in our car and put our seatbelt on expecting to get into an accident, nor are we mad at the seatbelt and putting it on if we didn't get into an accident. The truth is it's there if something happens, and that's what it's supposed to do. You don't want to have to use it. It's actually a good thing to never have to use the policy that you've purchased. And that mentality is kind of how I like to look at insurances. And I think it's one of the misconceptions about insurance is that it's a waste. That seatbelt and putting that on was not a waste just because you didn't get into an accident. It was there to do its job, and it did what it needed to do, is to be that seatbelt. It's to be that safety net for you.
I love it. I love it. And I'm super happy that I have it. Got my seatbelt on, y'all. All right, Nicholas, anything else you want to share with the Nurses on Fire community?
Sure. One thing that is specific to fire planning, and the one
Mhm.
thing I like to say is please speak to an advisor.
Mm,
Disability insurance policies are very adjustable. There's a lot of
mhm,
different levers we can pull in terms of riders, benefit amount, uh, elimination periods, which can be adjusted to kind of form with the group benefits that you might have, such as the short-term disability or even the ones that you have through the state. And there's a lot of levers that we can pull to lower the cost in this so you can actually put more money in towards savings. So when you apply for something and you see a base price, that doesn't mean that's what it's set at. There's a lot of different things that we can do, especially with fire planning and maybe reducing that benefit period to more line up with your perceived retirement target in terms of age. So we definitely want to work with you to kind of get things into a budget that we can. There is no one size fits all for these policies. There is a best practice and a recommendation, but it does need to be tailored to your profile. So we do
mhm.
strongly recommend that you work with an advisor who's knowledgeable and can help you save money while you protect your money.
So, and you're saying working with an advisor, can people access an advisor through Policy Genius?
Absolutely. So the same people that we spoke about on those chat features are the same people that would be speaking on the phone. Our agents are extremely knowledgeable and happy to work and educate with anyone who comes through that is looking to protect their goose.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicholas. This has been great. I never thought I would have such a good time talking about disability insurance, but this has been so much fun. And I especially love your dance moves. Keep it up, but don't break your hip again.
Naseema, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
All right. Bye.
Take care.
Actually, well, almost stopped the, let me stop my recording.